Good evening, everybody. Hi, I'm Phil Dague from Indivisible Chester County, and tonight we have a very, very special guest. We have our United States Congresswoman representing us here in the 6th Congressional District of Pennsylvania. We have Chrissy Houlahan with us tonight, and Congresswoman Houlahan is here to talk to us tonight about issues that we face today in our country in Chester County, and she's also as many of you know, seeking re-election on the November 3rd election. So first off, I'd like to take this opportunity to welcome our Congresswoman. Good evening. How are you tonight?
I'm really well, thanks, Phil. Thank you so much for having me tonight and for everyone for joining us.
Excellent, excellent. So before we get started with the questions, would you like to maybe give us like the elevator speech about you for those people
Sure.
who haven't had the opportunity to get to know you as well as we have?
Of course, and it's my pleasure to be with you guys tonight. A little bit of a elevator speech regarding me. Prior to joining Congress this last session, I'm a freshman in Congress, so this is my very first term. I very much was an unexpected, unintended candidate for Congress. I served in a variety of different capacities before joining Congress. First, as an engineer in the Air Force, I was focused on strategic and air defense initiative issues. Secondarily, in growing good businesses in our community, amongst them a basketball apparel and footwear company that I helped grow to an international brand. I also was an educator for a period of time in North Philadelphia at the Simon Gratz School, and then focused in growing a nonprofit that was focused on early childhood literacy for those most underserved communities. And so I felt as though I was doing my part in serving our nation, and very much felt in the election of 2016 that I had a set of skills that would be useful to bring to bear on our behalves in Congress. And so as a consequence, I ran for Congress, and thankfully, thanks to many of your hard work, we were able to flip a seat that has in Chester County been red for 163 years to blue. So thank you for all of your hard work for that. Now in Congress in the last couple of years, as you can probably remember, shut down government, impeachment proceedings, and of course, pandemic and social unrest. Lots and lots going on in the world. But also in the Congress, we were able to push through legislation on violence against women, on gun violence and background checks, on the Paris Climate Accords, asking to return to those, protecting and defending the Affordable Care Act, lowering prescription drug prices, asking for a minimum wage of $15 an hour, equal pay for equal work, and of course the Equality Act. All of those things happened in the last year and a half in this Congress at the United States House of Representatives. And almost none of that actually made it through the Senate and onto the president's desk for signature. So there's a ton of work to be done. We have so much work to still do. And I'm really hoping that I'll be fortunate enough to be returned back to Congress to go back to bat for all of those issues on our behalves again.
Excellent. Great. I personally hope you are too. So
Thanks.
We'll get started right in with our questions here. At the beginning of 2020, the federal deficit was at about $1 trillion and has only gotten worse thanks to the pandemic. Last year, before the pandemic, you co-sponsored the Fiscal State of the Nation resolution. Can you tell us a little bit more about that and give us an update on where that stands today?
Sure. This is a bipartisan bill that requires the Comptroller General to present an assessment of our financial health to make sure that we are in good condition. And as you can probably appreciate, over the last 6 months during this pandemic, we as a nation have necessarily needed to spend a lot more money than we had intended to make sure that we can safely get ourselves out of a very, very bad situation. I mentioned that I'm an engineer. I very much am data driven. I like to make decisions based on data. I also, as I mentioned, am a former entrepreneur and business person, chief operating officer, chief financial officer, amongst other things. And so making sure that we run a tight ship fiscally for our taxpayers is very, very important for me. This particular initiative that you're talking about is a very, very bipartisan initiative. In fact, it is sponsored by 11 members of the Pennsylvania delegation, in addition to 135 members of the Congress at large. It was recently endorsed by something called the Select Committee on the Modernization of Congress. which is what it sounds like. It's sort of a special committee that was put together to try and innovate on how we get things done in Congress. And so I'm hopeful that we'll continue to work to make sure that something like this is pushed through bipartisanly, because I don't think there are a whole lot of people out there, R or D, who like to see us spending wastefully the taxpayers' resources.
No, that's for sure. That's for sure. The transition from fossil fuels to clean energy sources has been frustratingly slow in recent years, and we feel the clock is ticking. How optimistic are you that this process can be accelerated sooner rather than later, before it's too late?
Yeah, and this was something that I heard very much loud and clear during the campaign when I was a candidate, and then, of course, now as I serve in Congress. I think the nation and the world knows what is real, right? We know that climate change is real, and we know that human beings cause it, and we know that we're heading in absolutely the wrong direction very, very rapidly, catastrophically rapidly. We know that people from the Pope to the Pentagon recognize that we need to be doing something about this. And so one of our top priorities, our constituents' top priorities, Pennsylvania's top priorities, and the nation's top priorities needs to be addressing this. And in fact, just this week, as I left Washington this Thursday, we did in fact push through and vote on a very substantial package that talks about these specific issues, tax credits for solar deployments, improving energy storage, et cetera. And this piece of legislation actually also had the League of Conservation Voters endorsement on it. I'm optimistic that we have an opportunity to move this kind of legislation forward, but only if we have a good election outcome. And that good election outcome means that we have to protect and defend the seats that we've worked so hard in the House of Representatives to earn and to win. And we also have to, frankly, flip the Senate as well, so that all of this hard work that we've been doing on behalf of all of us to push forward innovative legislation on things like climate change is able to be met and picked up by the Senate and delivered into the president's desk for support and signature. We know that our president, the nominee, Vice President Biden, has in his mindset that we need to be addressing this and addressing it aggressively in his Build Back Better platform.
I hope so. I hope so. I really do. Small businesses throughout the U.S. and specifically here in Pennsylvania have been hit hard by the pandemic. What have you done and what will you do if reelected to assist them?
Sure, and this is actually it is tragic but serendipitous that the pandemic hit us as a community in the March, actually February, I guess, timeframe, and that I happened to be serving on the Small Business Committee on behalf of our community and on behalf of the Commonwealth and the country. So I'm actually really, really fortunate that I have the opportunity to really, roll up my sleeves and get my hands dirty on this issue on behalf of all of us. And I'm also really, really happy that I have personal experience on what it is to be an entrepreneur and to be a small business owner and operator. As I've always said, in the best of times, this is a really hard thing to be as a small business owner and operator and an entrepreneur. And in the worst of times, which arguably we're in right now, it's nearly impossible. So we in my office have been incredibly focused on the small business owners and operators. We've reorganized our office to create a task force focused exclusively on our response to small businesses, so we can make sure that we can help expedite calls that are coming to us for this. We've organized lots of town halls that have been focused explicitly on this issue, participated with chambers of commerce on those town halls and with folks in our community on the federal and local and state level who can be helpful in educating people on what the Paycheck Protection Program means, what the EIDL program means, how they can make sure that they can access help and resources. So we've been working really, really hard on that. I have also been leading something called the Paycheck Protection Program Forgiveness Act. And what this is, again, is a bipartisan act. It's also a bicameral act, so it's in the Senate as well as in the House. And this is a streamlining of the way that people who have taken these Paycheck Protection Program loans can get through for forgiveness. So about 86% of the people who have taken these small business loans, these paycheck protection loans during the pandemic, are taking them for less than $150,000. And so we as a government are trying to make that process a little bit easier on the small businesses and on the lending institutions as well, to be able to allow the small businesses not to have to hire CPAs and be extraordinarily strained by this, and the banks to be able to focus on those bigger loans to make sure that we're being diligent about our oversight. And I'm really, really hopeful that in the next package, pandemic relief package, we might have the opportunity to have this Paycheck Protection Program Forgiveness Act included in that package.
No, great. In your answer there, you mentioned something that leads me to my next question. Transparency is something that we here in ICC expect from our elected officials. To your credit, it seems like every time I turn around, you're having another town hall. Before the pandemic, you had a lot of in-person town halls, and then you've had a lot online town halls. By contrast, I think I can count on one hand the number of town halls that your predecessor had in his last 2 years in office. So is this something that I think I know the answer to this, but I'm going to ask anyway. Is this something we can expect to continue?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. It was one of the commitments that I made, not just to our community, but to myself. I really feel as though it's important to be in and among our community, to have outreach, active outreach in the form of town halls, and now in the form of telephone town halls or Facebook town halls, to make sure that we are in and around our community and soaking up all of the ideas and struggles of the folks that we represent, that I represent in our office. And so I am very proud of the town halls that we've had. In fact, we have had more than any other representative in Pennsylvania on both sides of the aisle in this term. And I'm very, very happy to have said that. I will continue to do that. Another thing that's important to me to point out about these town halls is that we have worked very, very diligently, not just to have them, but to sort of reset the way that we talk to one another during those town halls. I think that our community really is looking for civility and decency. I think that we're looking for the ability to show up to something like a town hall and not be screaming at each other or over each other, but be respectful of one another and recognize that we all are patriots. We're all there for the right reasons. And so we've worked really, really hard with our town halls to make sure that people feel comfortable coming and feel as though that they will be respected when they do come. And that's an important part of our town halls.
Thank you. Our next question comes from my fellow ICC leader, Laura Davis. And I'm going to quote her now in this question. It's rather long, so bear with me here. Quote from Laura: I encouraged a friend who was having a problem to go to an open house at your office to see if you could help. She eventually got her conflict resolved through the help of you and your team. She was later contacted by your office for a follow-up with you personally and your campaign manager, Sue Walker, to see how the issues were resolved and just to talk. Besides encouraging direct access to your office, you also hold town halls and open houses in order to stay informed on the issues that concern your constituents. Our country needs more of this by their representatives. It seems that the wealthy donors have the ear of our elected officials and the voters are left without a voice. This brings me to Citizens United and other campaign laws that disenfranchise voters. How can this be changed so that the government is not being run by a few wealthy people or corporations and return to representing the American people? So my question is, as a U.S. representative, what can be done about this?
I worry about this too, and this is actually one of the reasons, one of the things that was most alarming and eye-opening to me as a person who had never run for anything before, was the importance of having the resources you need to be able to communicate, but also the brokenness of the process by which we ask our candidates and representatives to raise that money to be able to communicate. It's really broken. Also, what's broken is access to the ballot. We've seen that, pretty acutely during the pandemic. Whether or not people have the ability to vote is also something that I think is being stressed right now. And lastly, kind of back to civility and decency, the ethics of your elected government officials is also kind of in question. So one of the first things, literally the first thing that we did in Congress this session, was to vote for something called HR 1, which is House Resolution 1. And that gives an indication of the priority that we put to this as a House, because you start from 1 every single 2 years. House Resolution 1 was about exactly this issue that Laura is asking about, which is how do we make sure that we create a system that isn't being driven by the wealthy? How do we make sure that people have access to the ballot freely and unfettered? How do we make sure that we're holding our elected officials to account and to a high set of standards? And we did pass this very, very large, very ambitious piece of legislation in the House as one of the very first things that we did. And as with many of the other things we've already talked about, it was not met and taken up within the Senate. This is actually one of those things that I will ask of our leadership, if I'm fortunate enough to be elected again on all of our behalves, to bring up again. It has the highest priority again in my mind, because it really is that important. I'm very proud to say that I've been endorsed by an organization that's called End Citizens United, which is kind of what it sounds like. It's an organization that is tasked itself with making sure that we no longer are beholden to the Citizens United court case, but rather that we are in a lot of different ways trying to attack it and dismember it. So again, this is one of those things where elections have consequences. If we work really hard to to hold the House as with Democrats, to change the Senate to Democrats, we have the opportunity to dramatically change the way that we approach politics in this way. It's very, very, very important that we do that.
Very good. Thank you. Since 2014, almost 4,000 people in our region have lost their lives due to firearms, a staggering number, I'm sure you'll agree. Can you give us an update on your efforts to curb gun violence while at the same time upholding the rights afforded to us under the Second Amendment?
Sure. And, this is also a question that I get asked not infrequently. Our community is a really great community. We are, in terms of our composition, this district is all of Chester County and the lower part of Berks County. And about 40% of us, it's estimated, are in fact gun owners. I, of course, served in the military, and so I understand very much the expectation of protecting our Second Amendment. But we also, as a community, even though there are many of us who are gun owners and safe gun owners, many of us, on the order of 80 or 90% of us, believe that there are common sense things that we can be doing together to make sure that we're safer in our community, make sure that we're safer in our schools. And we are asking our elected officials, both at the federal level and at the state level, to help us be safer. And so some of the things that we have done in the Congress at the federal level is pass several pieces of legislation that are on background checks. One of them in particular was called HR 8, again, House Resolution 8. It was named 8 because it was the 8th year anniversary of the shooting of Congresswoman Gabby Giffords. If you all recall, that was a very horrible event. And this talked to those issues of background checks. Again, the things that we can work together on that many of us support. We also did pass legislation that was bipartisanly passed this year, which allowed us to begin to research the causes of gun violence through the health departments and National Institute of Health, which is a really actually relatively innovative thing that we're now putting together bipartisanly to recognize that we need to understand better, where is this violence coming from? What are the mental health issues that are involved here as well? I'm really happy to have the endorsement of every gun safety for everyone. Every town for gun safety. I'm really excited to try to bring this legislation back up again. I'm also heartened to see that our state government has also been active in this area too. And we need to continue to push on this, because this, again, is a common sense issue that so many of our community agree needs to be addressed. I'm really lucky that I got to have the chance to highlight the importance of this issue in Congress for my very first State of the Union. I got to attend with Michelle Roberson. Many of you all know her from our community. She sadly lost her daughter to gun violence. And I, as well as two of the other newly elected congresswomen in our community, brought guests that highlighted this very important issue. And all four of the congresswomen who you all just recently elected together we joined the Gun Violence Task Force, our caucus in Congress, to make sure that we brought a huge message to the area, to southeastern Pennsylvania, that we really mean that this is an issue that we'd like to address together.
Okay. In the wake of the death of U.S. Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, it seems all but certain that Donald Trump will have the opportunity to appoint another judge to our nation's highest court. In fact, today he announced that he will be sending to Mitch McConnell for Senate approval Amy Coney Barrett. No surprise to anybody there. There seems to be a certain lack of fair play going back to when President Obama attempted to try to get Merrick Garland appointed when he had almost a full year left on his term back in 2016. Or I'm sorry, 2016. The lack of fair play in this process has renewed talk of increasing the size of the court. Where do you stand on that? Or is there any other suggestions you might have to remedy this situation? Because it hasn't always been this way.
Sure. And I worry too. This is obviously, I'm incredibly saddened by the death of Justice Ginsburg. I had the opportunity on Thursday to go stand and see her lying in repose at the steps of the Supreme Court, which is a remarkable experience that I'm grateful to have been able to have. And I wasn't even thinking about running for Congress when, as you were talking about, the drama was ongoing and unfolding with Obama's nomination of Justice Garland, or Judge Garland. Here we are, four years later, and we're in a very similar situation. And yet, you're right, the rules seem to be changed, and fair play doesn't seem to be part of the conversation. And that's enormously disappointing. Going back to this conversation about civility and decency, I think people, both sides, R's and D's and I's, everybody knows what's right. And I genuinely believe what's right now is to let the people decide, to go through the election process and to make, if President Trump is elected again, have him make that choice. If Vice President Biden is elected, have him make that choice. I really genuinely believe we need to have that happen, and that seems to be only fair. I am interested, speaking about only fair, in thinking about going back to the requirement that used to exist, that we used to have 60 votes. As you might remember, Justice Ginsburg was nominated with more than 90 votes, affirmative votes for her when she was first appointed to the court. And I genuinely believe, need to be aggressively working together to head back into that kind of a consensus government where we are not trying to tit for tat each other and outdo one another with diabolical plans to spite the guy for the last thing they did to us.
I couldn't agree with you more. I do like the idea of returning to the 60 vote requirement. You mentioned going to Washington this past week to pay your respects to Ruth Bader Ginsburg. Could you tell us a little bit more about what she means to you, her legacy means to you personally?
Yeah, she's, first of all, it's kind of overwhelming. The year and a half that I've been, in Congress, we've lost Elijah Cummings, we've lost John Lewis, we've now lost Justice Ginsburg. It's been a heck of a year and a half, a heck of a freshman year in terms of just seeing giants, legends no longer with us, and having to take up the mantle and kind of lead by their example of Good Trouble, or We're Better Than This, or Ruth Bader Ginsburg talking about fighting for things that you care about, but in ways that other people will join you. I think that those are some of the lessons that these really inspirational people have at least taught me, that I'm hoping that I'll be able to carry on. Justice Ginsburg was a working mom like I am. She, I think, was incredibly instrumental in giving people some of the freedoms that I take for granted right now. Something like even being able to get a mortgage was not something that was available for people like me before she was around. Her voice, her very, very clear voice for the LGBTQ community, is something that's inspiring to me. My daughter is a member of the LGBTQ community. And I know that some of her friends were at the courthouse steps when that court case was recently announced. And that was a pretty impactful day. So she means a ton to me, but I'm certain that she means a ton to the nation. I've been really struck by how overwhelmingly saddened people are, regardless of who you are, by her passing. Very, very classy woman.
Yes, indeed, she certainly was. This is kind of like what we're already talking about, especially with the Supreme Court. But it goes beyond the Supreme Court and in Congress. One common refrain from I hear from people on both sides of the aisle is frustration over the partisan politics that seem to be the rule rather than the exception in Washington. The procession, it seems like really it keeps anything from getting done. And like you said, you worked hard on a lot of bills and got a lot of things accomplished in the House of Representatives, only to have them go over to the Senate and just sit there and not do anything. I'm going to tout my own family tree right now. My great uncle, my grandfather's older brother, was the only person ever from Downingtown to serve in the United States House of Representatives. The districts were cut a little bit different then, and he was in District 9, and he served from 1945 to 1965. He was a Republican, but I'm certain that the atmosphere was a lot different back then, and I'm sure that probably like after a long day in the Capitol, they all probably went out and maybe a few Democrats and Republicans had beers together or something like that. Is that day dead forever, or do you ever see that coming back? And I respect you, and I know that you're a nice person, and you're not who I'm talking about when I say this right now. So.
No, and I hope so. I worry about that too. It's actually one of the reasons why I ran, for Congress, is that I believe in our nation, and I believe in civility and decency, and I believe we're better than this. And it's one of the reasons why in Congress I've tried really hard personally to not only set an example, but to try to bring other people along. And so I'm one of the co-founders of an organization called For Country. It's a caucus of people who have served in the military prior to joining Congress. It's 10 Democrats and 10 Republicans, and we've all, as I've mentioned, have backgrounds of service. But what's interesting about this group is that most groups in Congress are about one issue, maybe LGBTQ or plant or earth, safety, health issues, or there's a wine caucus. But this actually is a group that just got together on the basis of the fact that we need to be better to one another. We need to meet each other, as you mentioned. We need to find common ground and work together. Ideologically, we are all over the spectrum, this group, this For Country group, but we've had some real success. We've had the ability by working together to push forward some of the legislation that I had in the NDAA, which is the Defense Authorization Act, that allows 2.1 million federal employees for the very first time to have 12 weeks of parental leave. And that's not only because it was an idea whose time had come, but it was also because this For Country caucus helped me push it through. And so there is help and hope there. I would also say there's another group that I'm a part of that's called the Problem Solvers. And the Problem Solvers are, again, they're not military. They're 25 and 25, kind of a Noah's Ark caucus of Democrats and Republicans, and they get together to try and find that common ground in the middle, to try and solve problems. And you probably saw in the news this week and last week that organization, that group, is working together to put together a compromise proposal, so to speak, for the next round of stimulus for COVID. So I would tell you that don't lose hope. There are good people on both sides of the aisle there, and there are real relationships happening there. I would also tell you, be skeptical, frankly, of the media, because the media doesn't benefit from telling you that there are, good people who are working together and they're super boring, or they're, doing nice things with one another and trying to, push bipartisan work. It's much more interesting to have some conflict. So just be a little bit skeptical of whatever source of news you're watching to make sure that you're looking for the helpers, as Mr. Rogers would say.
Mr. Rogers, yes, I love a Mr. Rogers reference every time. My son Ben just graduated from Temple University this past May, and like many Americans, he is now faced with substantial student debt. The pandemic has made his job hopes not pan out exactly the way that he had expected. And I was wondering, is there anything that the federal government can do to help people like Ben and so many Americans like him?
Yeah, and this is a big issue, of course. A generation is struggling, particularly not just with college debt or concern about where their job will come from, but as of course you also know that our little kids, our little people are also struggling, as are their parents, in trying to figure out how to navigate this. And so I think the first thing that we need to do is address the root cause of our collective problems, which is COVID. We need to make sure that we're being as aggressive as we can to understand this disease and control this disease, to find treatments, to find vaccines, and to do the right thing from a health perspective, so that we are that we feel safe in being able to go to school or go to businesses and jobs. So that's the first thing that we need to do, is worry about that, so that your son can get back to his normal life. My daughter is in graduate school right now too, and I really worry for her as well, whether she'll be able to come out into the economy, what the economy will look like. As you guys probably know, although kind of the mantra is look to the stock market, we know that most folks are not invested in the stock market, and that's not terribly meaningful for them to look to that. And so that's why I've been trying to push forward legislation that helps in a way your people like your son. $25,000 worth of educational benefits, or benefits, at large, that would help people who are in the front line, because we really have asked a whole lot of this generation of frontline people, in many ways not dissimilar from people who served in the military. We want to make sure that we're giving them their due recognition that they deserve, as almost in the form of a GI Bill. So I've been supportive of that. Also supportive of a $10,000 loan relief due to economic hardship for people like your son. So these are the things that we need to be doing. But first and foremost, we have to unify together to rid ourselves of this disease, because that's the biggest issue that we all can face right now.
Okay. COVID related. Yeah, I always stand at the polls on election day, in the primary and the general. But like many Pennsylvanians, for the very first time this past election, I voted by mail, and it worked out rather well for me. I got my ballot in plenty of time, and I plan on voting by mail in the general election. I was just notified that my ballot is being prepared and will be to me soon. I already know everybody I'm voting for, and I'm well versed on the protocol and the security envelope and the things that I need to do to make sure that my ballot counts. But I still have a little apprehension about doing it, but I'm going to do it that way anyway. I know about the drop boxes, and a lot of people are just like, they're really worried. They don't know what to do, but they don't want to get sick, but they want to make sure that their vote counts, because this is such an important election, probably the most important election that many of us have ever had in our lifetime. I don't know if Congress can do anything about to fixing the situation for this election, but going forward for the next time, can we have a safe voting system installed that people can have confidence in, that their vote's going to count, and to dissuade people who say that it leaves us open for fraudulent voting?
So all really good questions. I also voted by mail during the primary, and I intend to vote by mail this time around as well. I also have requested my mail-in ballot, and I'm hopeful that it'll come soon, and I will follow all of the rules diligently to make sure that my vote counts. We have been, as an office, hosting a weekly series called Vote Safely in 2020. So please, if you have questions that you'd like to tune into, we'd love to answer them for you on how to vote safely. It's up to people what safe looks like for them. And for some people, it means they'd like to vote from the comfort of their home. Some people would like to go ahead and vote in person. Whatever it is that feels comfortable for you, I would encourage you to vote. Again, it doesn't matter what party you're from. If you can vote, you should vote. We need everybody's voice at the ballots and at the polls. You're right. There is some concern about, why is this so hard? Why can't we, unify or standardize this? Largely this is something that's driven by local and state government. But the federal government does have a role in this to make sure that we're providing resources that the state and local governments can use to invest in things like counting machines for some of our ballots, as an example. And the federal government has genuinely fallen down in this area for lots and lots of different reasons, some of them less than admirable. But I do hope that we have the opportunity through something like HR1, the one bill that we talked about that was not only about money in politics, but was also about voter access and voter resources, that we will be able to revisit this after this election, and we'll be able to highlight the importance of people being able to vote easily. It's really important that people have their voice heard, and I'm looking forward to in a hopeful new Congress with an administration that values this as well, to making sure that that is emphasized at the federal level.
Thank you. Now, about mask wearing and vaccinations and all that, we all want to get past this thing. And the head of the CDC recently said that mask wearing could do more to stop the spread, keep individuals safe than the vaccine can. And the vaccine right now is still a big question mark, and a lot of people are concerned about that. I don't know. None of us know exactly when a vaccine will become available for widespread distribution. But we do know that we can all wear a mask today, and certainly I do. I'm a big believer in it, but it's frustrating when you go out and see in certain areas so many people don't. In fact, I just avoid certain areas because of this. I've heard people talk about the government, perhaps, either the state government or the federal government making mandate mask wearing. And I'm kind of skeptical that would be enforceable or it would stand up in court. But do you have any ideas or any suggestions that we can do to have increased mask compliance in our country?
So I also am confounded by why it's not an easy ask to ask people to just be kind to one another and to be respectful and to protect each other. I wear a mask for you, you wear a mask for me. My health is dependent on your health. And also the thing that I think is most difficult for me to understand is, while I am a healthy person and I think I would be okay if I got COVID, there are people in my family who are not. And I would like to make sure that I'm protecting them. And I hope that you would like to make sure that I'm protecting members of your family that are the same. So it feels just like kind of a regular, decent human being kind of a thing to inconvenience yourself slightly by putting a mask on. Ultimately, I think you're right. It's up to state and local governments and businesses to decide what those mandates are. Ultimately, I think you're right. Our country is certainly a nation of laws, but we also are a nation of very independent thinking people. I'd like to focus, what we are focusing on, as you mentioned, a vaccine, and making sure that we are delivering an efficacious and safe vaccine as rapidly as possible. I also am focused on making sure that we have a very tight PPE supply chain, a reliable supply chain, so that organizations can reopen safely with the proper PPE. And so those are some of the things that we can do collectively together. It's my understanding that even if and when we have a safe and effective vaccine, that it will be quite some time when we won't still need to be wearing masks, even if many of us have been vaccinated. So I think we should all settle in and find our favorite mask and do the right thing for one another.
Well, I'm going to seize on this opportunity to do a shameless plug for my wife. She's on the board of the Downingtown Library, and they're having a 5K, a virtual 5K coming up. And instead of the normal giveaway of a T-shirt, this year they're giving these masks, which with the logo emblazoned on it. So run safely and get this cool mask. And it's a great mask. It really is. I'm winding down here. We're down to the last two questions. So I'm going to ask you about the president, some statements that he made that are rather troubling to me and many of us this week regarding the peaceful transition of power. He says it's not a priority. The reporters went back to him the following day and asked him to kind of give him an out on that, it seems, but he doubled down on that. And what are your thoughts about this? And what do you think that the federal response would be?
Yeah, it's concerning. Even if said in jest, it's not appropriate for the commander-in-chief to talk in these terms. It's alarming. It's stressful and troubling. I think what I would say for all of us is that we need to be prepared to wait. I think that's one of the messages that I'd like to leave with the group that we are talking to right now is we are not probably going to have the election night that all of us are used to, sitting down with, our popcorn and our family and watching, the election results unfold and knowing usually by the time we go to bed kind of what the results are. This is gonna take a while for us to properly count the votes. And so we need to make sure that we're doing that and being peaceful and calm in that effort. We also need to make sure that we've done the work beforehand to make sure that we've done everything that we can to make sure we're diligent and that we're attentive, that there is no fraud and that every vote gets counted, Democrat, Republican, or independent. And then I think what we need to do is demand from each other, our citizenry and our elected officials, that again, like wearing a mask, we know what doing the right thing means. We know what a peaceful transition of power means. We know what accepting the results of the election means. And we need to make sure that we are asking our elected officials on both sides of the aisle to be statesmen and to provide the calm that our nation needs to move forward into whatever the administration is, whoever is the winner.
Okay, thank you. Last question. Let's imagine now that it is now November 4th, and we've counted the ballots, and we have discovered that you have been reelected. Congratulations. And that the Democrats have maintained control of the House of Representatives. And not only that, now we have a majority in the United States Senate. In a nutshell, I don't need this to be a long answer, but imagine now that you now have the opportunity to push through things that you haven't been able to before. What are the top 3 things that you want to get pushed through now that you have unbridled ability to do that?
So I guess what I would say is to kind of look to what we've already passed, to see the priorities of this Congress and the priorities of me in representing us in our community. HR 1, we talked about, kind of making sure first and foremost that we have a system that values the voter and values individuals and prizes integrity. HR 8, gun safety, gun violence, the Affordable Care Act and prescription drugs, the Paris Climate Accord, equal pay for equal work, the Equality Act. I could name, literally a litany of these kinds of things, and most of them have pretty low bill numbers. So if anybody wants to sort of look up what those bill numbers are, that would be a pretty good indicator of the things that are my priority on behalf of us. The other thing, though, that would be my priority on behalf of us that wouldn't be, something you've kind of already seen, so to speak, is I very much believe that we need to be creating what I kind of loosely call a never again agenda. And there's 2 parts to that kind of. One part is never again in pandemic. One of the reasons why I was motivated to run for Congress rather than a state position was I am an engineer and I'm a former science teacher, and I really worry about technology, and I really worry about disease. And I put myself deliberately on the Armed Services Emerging Threats Committee and the Foreign Affairs Africa and Asia Subcommittee because I was already aiming myself and my background at things like biosecurity and things like cybersecurity. So I want to be helpful in creating a forward-looking agenda that says we're not going to be vulnerable like this again. And I also want to be helpful similarly on a forward-looking never again agenda, which is I don't ever want to see us as a nation be vulnerable to a commander-in-chief that takes our democracy for granted, both sides of the aisle. We've seen some vulnerabilities and some cracks that need some repairing that we need to do regardless of our party politics to make sure that we aren't in a position where we're having a conversation about peaceful transition of power, as an example. We need to make sure that we're thinking about what the agenda looks like to make sure that as a nation that we're more protected. And that would be something that I also would be interested in helping on in the next Congress.
Excellent, excellent. Well, thank you very much. I want to take a second here and thank my fellow ICC leadership team members, Rob Cates, who is our video guru, who we could not do events like this without, and Shannon Brown, Laura Davis, Eddie Ginterreiter, and Luke Bauerlein. And especially, we want to thank you, Congresswoman Houlahan, for taking time out of your schedule and coming and talking to us tonight. I think we touched on a lot of topics, and I wish you all the best for a successful and a very safe campaign season.
Thank you. Thank you. You guys run a tight ship. I really appreciate the questions, and thank you so much for your time on this Saturday.
You're quite welcome. You take care now.